Hello, everyone. Give everyone a minute to trickle in here as Zoom lets people in. Everyone, one more minute. It looks like we have almost everyone already. All right, who wants to kick us off? What did we cover yesterday? Wow, must be a terrible teacher if no one remembers what we covered yesterday. Requests? Yep. We did 3 different ways of accessing data in those requests through params, through the query, and through the body. When we do params, we want to be careful because params could either be root parameters or they could be query parameters. So they kind of work either way. So we want to be careful when we say params that we're specifying either they're the query parameter, meaning that they come after the question mark and have your key value pairs, or they're coming in as root parameters, in which case we need to give Express a heads up of, hey, these are coming in and here's what I would like to name them so I can access them. So yep, requests are, we made requests to the server, we sent back responses. And then important to remember that we created those roots, but there are lots of different names for roots. Basically, we created 3 separate endpoints yesterday and then had our server, our Express server, listening for them. So yep, Brielle, listen, we use Express, which is just a way for us to not have to worry about writing some under the hood code. So we don't have to write a bunch of node code. We can just kind of tap into Express and say, hey, Express, I'm setting up an API server here. Let me just start writing roots and get right into it. And then we used body parser as well. And body parser is what is known as a middleware, which we will be diving into a little later in the module. But basically telling Express, hey, I'm going to send in some JSON data, so it would be nice if you could make that accessible. Carolyn, good reminder, we used npx nodemon as well. That is what allowed us to reboot the server. So that whenever we make a change, nodemon is what we call a file watcher. So whenever any of the files it is watching changes, that is what automatically made the server restart. Anything else that stuck out to you from yesterday? We use the command app.use with body parser, and app.use is telling the Express server to use this middleware. The middleware we happen to use was body parser. Fabilia, we did code out the backend first. That is not always universally true. It depends on the company, depends how many developers you have, depends if you are the only developer and you're working in a full stack project. But yes, the backend can get coded out completely independently of the front end or vice versa. Make sure your host, I would say make sure your server is down before you download and install a package. And we can take a server down by just hitting Control-C in the terminal. And then to make sure you bring it back up after you install it as well. So it is very common to make a request to a server and your computer goes, well, the server's not running, so I can't find it. And it's also common for you to start up your server and the server tell you, well, I can't start because something else is already using that port. And that was the address in use error that we also ran into yesterday. Killing the terminal in VS Code will work. I would encourage you to shut down your servers before you close out VS Code. It's just a nicer way of giving the server a chance to stop running and close down cleanly. It's kind of like saying, oh, in order to shut down your computer, I don't just pull out the power cord. I want to, shut it down before I pull the power cord. Same thing for the server. So yes, you can close out the server by just closing the terminal window or the VS Code window that it's in. But it is best practice to hit Control-C on those servers and give it a chance to spin down. Anything else from yesterday? Anyone have a light bulb moment or anything that, kind of they got yesterday where they got excited for a split second? All right. Well, we will shoot for hopefully someone having that today. Yes, distinctions between setting stuff and telling it to do something. Yeah, so we are going to get progressively more and more advanced, which is a good segue into what we are covering today. So today we are going to build out a little React front end to use all three endpoints that we created yesterday. So starting to get more hands-on on a project, being able to send some data up to the server, being able to get the response, pulling that back using state and React to make that data show up. We're going to do some fun stuff of sending data back and forth there. Then we are going to keep the React train going and switch over to building out our chat app again in React. So we're going to talk about state and getting the messages showing there, kind of reusing a lot of the styling that we already had done in module 4, I think. So we're going to take that entire style sheet, pick it up and steal that, build out our React app. Then we are going to start talking about planning out our backend, starting to think about what endpoints we need, talking through what we need before we start coding them out, just so we've got that game plan figured out. From there, we are going to go back into our React code and layer in all of those endpoints. And then we are going to talk a little bit about how we can share our servers and actually have one server running that has all the messages showing up. That is a lot to cover in one day, so I am not going to be surprised if that spills into at least Wednesday. But the idea is to get a chat app working that we can actually send messages and see all of that definitely by the end of the week, if not tomorrow. So that is the goal. Does anyone have any questions about that? About anything we covered yesterday, about anything that they saw in the news? Any questions about the homework assignment from last night? Anything like that?
I had a couple.
Sure.
The difference between npm-s and -- save, especially like the 2 dashes.
No difference. They do the exact same thing. Normally, when you have one letter following, those are called flags. They're called flags in terminal land or in shell land. A flag you can think of as kind of like a prop or an attribute on HTML to pass some additional data into the command that you are running. Convention says that if it is a one-letter flag, you use 1 dash, and if it's like the name of the flag, you use 2 dashes. I'm not sure that that's enforced everywhere, but that's kind of the general convention. And so those are considered shortcut flags, right? Of, oh, I don't want to type in -- save every time, so I can just type in the -s. They're also known as aliases. So, oh, I'm just going to alias whatever the save command is into -s. But good question.
Okay. And another one was you assigned the require import to a variable, and I was wondering if there was a reason you did that, if we were going to use it later for something because we haven't been using it, or if you just have to do that when you use require.
Yeah, so you don't have to assign it to a variable, but we had to do it last night because we used express later on, right? So we did like a const express equals require express, and then we said const app equals express parentheses.
Oh, okay. Okay. I didn't catch that. Okay. Got it. You only used it once, but it was right there. Okay.
Yeah, right up at the top. And then we did something similar with body parser, I believe. I think we required body parser in, and then we told app.use body parser. So if you just want to pull in that code, but you don't need to reference anything in that specific code, you can just run your require statement, not assign it to a variable, and it will work fine. But because we were using parts of the code that we were requiring in, that's when we assigned it to a variable, so we had access to it.
Okay. I guess I was also a little thrown by the fact that it doesn't look like a function when you import it. So yeah. But
yeah,
we do that in React too. So
there's a joke in JavaScript that everything is a function. Because the way JavaScript works under the hood, it's like everything is a function, and you can like add in some additional functionality into any variable. So you'll hear that as kind of a joke among JavaScript developers. You'll also hear the joke that everything in JavaScript is an object. So even though it's a function or a string, or there are certain functions that you can call on any string or any function that are part of an object and be able to still run that code. So the two jokes that you'll hear in JavaScript is everything is an object or everything is a function. But in answer to your question, the reason why it is coming out, it is being exported from the code as a function, right? And so when we require that code in there, that could come back as a string, that could come back as a function, that could come back as whatever. And so the documentation for Express is where you would know, oh, let me go look at the Express getting started and figure out how to get the server up and know, I have to call that function and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay. I had one more question, but I think I kind of partly answered it for myself. So in res.send, in the last one, the add 3, so you're doing res.send, and then it's a JavaScript object, and then when it comes through in Postman, it's JSON. So I think the res.send is sending it to Express, and then Express is turning it into JSON.
You got it. Yep.
Okay.
There is some under the hood magic there, where the internet can really only send letters back and forth. Even when you have an image, that image is broken up and encoded into a bunch of different letters. And that encoding that it uses is .jpeg or .png or whatever it may be. So the internet really, yes, there are conventions that we use like JSON. XML is an older one that's still sometimes used, but not frequently anymore. But these are all standards of, hey, this is how we can send data and easily pull it apart. But the internet, at the end of the day, doesn't really matter. The internet just sends strings back and forth. And then it is up to either the recipient or the sender to say, hey, by the way, I'm either sending you some JSON or, I'm receiving some JSON and I need to pull that apart. So we pulled that apart with body parser when we sent the data up in our post request. But Express has that baked in under the hood to say, if you're sending an object back, you can't really send an object over the internet. So we are going to stringify that for you into JSON and then send that back. So very good catch on that. We are going to be working with Fetch tonight and are going to need to deal with doing that on the front end of saying, hey, I'm getting some JSON here. We need to parse this out so we're able to use it. Brandy, wanting to share your light bulb moment because that's a really good one. Use state accomplishes the same goal as that update HTML function that we used way back in the chat app and the to-do list app and all of that, right? What use state does is it's a hook, right? It's triggering the fact that, oh, I now have different things in my return statement in my component. I need to rerun that, regenerate my HTML and have that show up. And so that is why we use state. And we will be continuing to use that not only tonight, but for the next couple weeks. Anyone else have anything to contribute to the discussion before we kick off class?
Hey, Max, quick question.
Sure.
We used localhost calling 3000. Is there an IP address behind the localhost?
Yeah, localhost is almost always synonymous with the IP address 127.0.0.1. Most modern computers now have an alias set up. So whenever you use localhost, it points at 127.0.0.1. But there are some special IP addresses that even as developers, you'll become familiar with. 127.0.0.1 is one of them. You'll notice a lot of IP addresses start with 192.168. Those are designed to be reserved for local networks so that your router inside your house can use 192.168.0.1 or .1.1. And then your computer would have an IP address of something like 192.168.1.101 or something like that. So don't want to go too far into networking, but localhost is almost always, if not always synonymous with 127.0.0.1.
Thank you.
No problem. Brandy, good question. Why Fetch and not Axios? Axios is a perfectly fine option. And I don't want to discourage it. The reason why I'm going to go into Fetch is because it is native to JavaScript. So we can use Fetch without having to npm installing the package. We could use Fetch in our vanilla JavaScript. Now, the pushback to it being native JavaScript is that only more modern browsers support it. So I don't know that Internet Explorer 11, which even though Microsoft has said, we're done with this, even we aren't going to support it anymore, there are still places like hospitals and medical centers that don't want to upgrade, because if they upgrade, their super old software won't work in the newer browsers. And so if you talk to any web developer, especially any front-end developer, they will tell you that Internet Explorer is the bane of their existence, and it is something that just won't die. We are down, I want to say, to like 1% internet browser usage across the entire country, across the entire globe. But that 1% is still big enough that it still is a concern. So Axios may work better in older browsers, and there are ways, it's called a polyfill, to get Fetch to work in older browsers as well. So the polyfill is basically saying, look, this is something you should have if you're using a modern browser. But if you don't have it, we're going to kind of shove it in there. We're going to fill that missing feature and put it in there so you can use it. Because so many browsers support Fetch natively now, I'm not going to go too far into using a polyfill and getting them to work in older browsers. But Fetch is the modern replacement for what is called an XML HTTP request. Terrible name, because XML HTTP requests can be used to request any kind of data. The data returned does not have to be XML, but that is what was baked into JavaScript long ago to be able to make these calls in JavaScript. So Fetch is just a newer function. When I say newer, it has been out for, I want to say, at least 10 years now. So this is not like we're on cutting edge or bleeding edge or anything like that. But we're going to go into Fetch a little bit. And then maybe that's something that we can do towards the end of the week or in office hours, is talk a little bit about how we can accomplish the same goal with Axios. But as you guys start using Fetch, I think you'll find that you can draw parallels between the two pretty quickly. Great question. And it's common to use, so Node does not have Fetch built in, or if they do, it's only built in the latest versions. So it's also very common to see a package on the back end, either Node Fetch, which is literally a polyfill for Fetch for Node. Request is one that I think got depreciated. I believe Axios works on the back end, and it's probably one of the 3 biggest supported API call kind of libraries. So all good options. Carolyn, I hope you mean XHTML as a joke. XHTML is a markup, is a specific way to write your HTML code. XHTML isn't really used anymore. We use HTML5 as the dominant standard. But there were some older variations of HTML. Someone thought it would be a great idea if HTML looked more like XML. And so they literally merged XML and HTML together. But that is not really used anymore. I'm sure there are still web browsers that support it, but that's just not a modern standard that we use. HTML5, CSS3 are kind of what have replaced any of the older standards for that. It is definitely, well, I can't say definitively that it's depreciated, but to me, it is depreciated. That is a quick Google search, though. It was released in 2000. It does not look to be depreciated, but I can't tell you the last time I've talked to someone who wrote their HTML into the XHTML standard. So may not be officially depreciated, but it's definitely old. Any other questions? Okay. So I have my VS Code open. I'm actually going to close it. No, I'm not. I'm going to split my code a little bit because we are going to start working with both our front end and our back end. So the way I always do this in my head is I always have the back end code on the right half of my screen, and I have the front end code on the left half of the screen. If you want to see my head just burst into flames, sneak into my house, and swap the 2 windows on me, I will stare at my backend code on the left side of the screen and not figure out for the life of me why there is JSX happening over there. So that is just a mental thing. Most code editors will let you open your backend code and your front end code in the same window. I prefer to have them in 2 separate windows. And while we are talking about preference, it is also possible to put all of your front end code in the exact same folder as your back end code. If you are working on what is called a monolith, just this huge amount of code, and your front end gets sent through your back end code, it is common to see your front end code in the exact same folder as the back end. With the advent of React and Angular and a couple more modern frameworks, it is becoming more and more common to what we call decouple your code, to have your front end code in one folder and your back end code in another. Whether or not your text editor allows you to open up both folders and have both open simultaneously, I think VS Code allows you to do that. But because I am used to having my front end code in one window and my back end code in the other, I am going to keep them split. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to file open. And I have my add server here already. I'm in my code folder, module 7, week 1. I have my add server. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pop open my week 1 folder and hit open on that. And I'm going to right click and open in integrated terminal. And I'm going to run pwd just to make sure I'm at the right path. And what create react app does for us is whenever we name in the command, it's actually going to create a new folder for us with all of the code in it. So what we are going to do, again, making sure that I'm in the week 1 folder and not in the server. You do not want to be in add server because we are going to keep the 2 folders separate. So I'm going to run npx, and npx again is going to use npm, allow us to run this create react app command and not enforce us to install it or require us to install it. So I'm going to run npx create-react-app, and I am going to call this add front end. No spaces, dashes are allowed, I believe. I'm going to hit enter there. And it's saying it needs me to install the following package. And so I'm going to say Y on that and enter. If it doesn't ask you to do that and just runs along and starts installing it, that's fine. It yelled at me because it had capital letters in it. So I will take out the capital letters and use a dash instead. And while it's doing that, I'm going to get my window set up. So I'm going to do file new window, and I'm going to file open, and I'm going to pop open my code, module 7, week 1, add server. So I'm going to open that. And I'm going to shove that on the right half of my screen. And then, no, you moved the wrong window. There we go. And then I'm going to come over here. Still waiting for that command to finish running. React has a lot of stuff that it needs to download in order for it to work. Okay, finally installed there. So I'm going to go to file open here, and I'm going to open up my add front end and make sure that over on my right window, I just have my backend files. And over on my left window, I just have my front end files. So I'm going to right click, open an integrated terminal. And I am going to use my npm start. And I'm going to hit OK. And I should have my hello world in React. take its sweet time to load and show up. So we want VS Code again to have our two windows open, the back end on the right, the front end on the left. We created our front end using npx create React app, and we're reusing the code that we had from yesterday to use as our starting point. So I'm going to take a break there. The goal is to not only have these two windows open, but to also run npm start in our front end and see this in our web browser. I will give everyone a chance to catch up before I keep going. Feel free to ask any questions.
So you're in the add front end folder when you do npm start, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And just for good measure, we should also have our backend running. So if I hit open an integrated terminal and I come down here and I run my npx nodemon app.js, if I run that, I was not expecting it to do that. Well, we're going to fix the problem anyway. I was expecting there to be an error because if you look, we've got React running on port 3000. Well, if you look over at our node code, our express code, our server's running on 3000 over here. So that could cause a headache and problems down the road. So I'm going to just change this to 3001 just so we don't have any conflicts. And I have to update my console log as well. Okay, so now that's running over there. If I go to my browser, I can refresh. I have my React code. And if I go to localhost 3001, and I believe we have to do add as our endpoint, we see something come back from the server. So we've got two servers running. One server is our React server, which is serving up our front end. And then the other server that is running is our back end, and that is using the same code from yesterday. And that is in the Classroom GitHub repo if you need it. Carolyn, it doesn't matter what you named it, as long as you have the code from yesterday, that's all that matters. If you don't, you can just grab the folder out of the Classroom repository and copy it into your own and use that as the starting point. I happen to call the folder add server, but it doesn't really matter what you call the folder. Let me kick off a poll and see if so when I say code working, I mean that you've got your front end and back end server up and that you can access them both in the front end. I'm sorry, in Chrome. Got 6 votes in, so I'm thinking people are still working. If you have questions, feel free to shout them out.
Yeah, I have a question. I was trying to open stuff and I couldn't hear what you're saying because I can't process that when you're talking and I'm doing something. So I have my 2 files open in 2 new windows.
Yep.
I did open React. The React did take over what was open yesterday, that 3000. So I think I missed that, what you were supposed to do.
If you go up to the top to file and then go down to new window.
I mean, I have 2
windows.
I have the 2 files in 2 different windows. Like I have add front end and I have add server.
Oh, perfect. That's what you should be at.
Okay. Well, I don't have the local host open, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay, so you've got to open 2 local hosts. So you've
Okay.
got to open up local hosts on the front end. So right click on the front end VS Code window, open integrated terminal. And that one you're going to run npm start. And you're running npm start because it's a React server.
I did that, but it won't actually let me, when I do right click, it doesn't give me open integrated terminal for some reason.
I think Kyle had that same issue. Can you share your screen? Because I'm curious to see what the problem is.
Sure. Like if I go here and do this.
Yeah, so you have to right click under that. So anywhere in that pane.
But
Yep.
like on anything is fine. Okay.
I believe so. Okay, that
But
opened
now I'm
you
in node modules.
Yep. So I would right click on any of the files themselves. So like anything either in here or even anywhere in there should work as well.
Okay.
Yep, and now you're in the right folder.
Okay, I didn't realize that. So at this screen I did open and I have my React over here, so that's correct.
Yep. So
And-
go back to your VS Code. It looks like you already have your React server running probably in one of these 2 shells.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to just click on one of them just to find the right one. Not that one. Not that one. How do you have your server running? Can you go back to your browser and try and refresh? Okay.
Okay.
It was off. Okay, so now you can
Okay.
go back to your VS Code. Go ahead and run your npm start in that terminal. And while that is firing up, we can go back to the other VS Code window, and we want to run our npx nodemon app.js. And that should start up. And then we changed 3000 here and here to 3001, just to make sure we don't have any conflicts with React. And then if you hop over to your browser and open a new tab, you should be able to go to localhost 3001 /add. Oh,
/add.
that works
Yeah.
too. The cannot get just tells me the server is up and running. So you're good there.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else have questions before we steamroll forward?
I just want to clarify, you said we should be seeing cannot get /add. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. If you do /add /1/2 or
Okay.
any 2 numbers, then you should get the sum back. And then you should be good to go.
Thank you.
But yeah, cannot get whatever. You think, oh, well, that's an error message. Yes, it's an error message, but it's an error message coming back from the server. So we know your server is actually up and running. Any other questions? Okay. So let's get our front end rocking and rolling here. I am going to start with Bootstrap because Bootstrap is kind of my wheelhouse. Don't tell me I'm not sharing my screen. Okay. I'm going to head over to getbootstrap.com. I'm going to go to get started. I'm going to shrink this down and grab my CSS. And then I'm going to pop open in my public and go to my index.html and drop in my style sheet. Doesn't really matter where, as long as it's in the head. And while we're in here, I might as well grab our JavaScript. I don't think we're going to be needing it, but we'll grab the bundle anyway and throw that down right before the end of my body tag. So we'll go ahead and save that. We'll pop back over to React app. No major changes there. That's okay. Now I am going to go on a deleting spree because I want to clean some stuff out. So I'm going to basically get rid of all of this and do my hello world and save that and make sure that's showing up. And I am now going to head over to my index.css and I'm going to delete all of that code out and go to my app.css and clean all of that out. And now we should have a clean slate with just React and Bootstrap. So going to keep going here. I would like 2 things to show up so I can type in numbers. What am I going to use to do that? If I type anything into a web page, what kind of thing do I need? What kind of component? What kind of HTML tag do I need? Input. So I'm going to create my input and I'm going to say type is equal to, you guys have probably used text before or submit. I'm going to say my type is equal to number. And because I want to follow React convention, I'm just going to use a self-closing tag there. Then I'm going to pause. I'm going to save. I'm going to come over here and I have my number showing up, my input showing up. Okay, well, we should probably be a little better. We should probably use a label and say num1. And now that's showing up. And now we should come down here. Let's just use a break tag for the sake of brevity. And I'm going to copy all of this and come down here, say num2, and save, and come over. And there it is. Okay, great. Making good progress. Now I need a button. And the button is going to say add up. That's kind of okay, but we want to get a little fancier. So let's add some Bootstrap. We're going to say class equals form control. And I'm going to put that on my input, both of them. And then I'm going to add a class to my button called BTN and BTN primary. Save, come over here. I'm surprised that that worked. Why am I surprised that that worked? What's one thing that's different in React HTML that we need to write differently than regular HTML? Class name. You got it. I don't know what version of React let you just start using class instead of class name. That's news to me. But as far as I know, the standard is still to use class name instead of just class. So we're going to come over here. Didn't really change anything. We can make one final cleanup. I'm just going to throw everything in a div class name equals container. And throw that div down at the bottom. And I think that will give us a little breathing room. All right, not too bad. I'm sure we could style this more, but point of this is not to do anything fancy, right? Okay, so we need to do something when the button, when something happens on the button. So what are we going to use to make something happen when the button is interacted with? On click. Yep. We could do it as a submit. Then we have to layer in the form. So because we want to practice with using state a little bit, we're not going to use a form and we are going to use the on click instead. And then access those form inputs a little differently. A form is a completely fine option and you could totally do that. I am picking the more complicated route here just so we get a little practice with our state. So I am going to add my on click And my on click is going to be add, I'm going to call it add one because we have 3 different add methods in our backend. So I know just thinking about what's coming ahead that I'm going to name it add one. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say const add one is equal to some function that I would like to run. Now, in order to add things together, what do we need? Object literal, not quite. Parameters are on the right track. I'm thinking even more basic than that. In order to add something together, we need numbers to add, right? And so the goal here is that we can type in a number here and a number here and have it show up somewhere on the screen, right? And so in order to access them, yes, we could use a form and we could go through the event and get the form data out that way. But I kind of would like to access this in the state. I would like to know what the state of this is when we type in a number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const num1 and then set num1 is equal to useState. And then I'm going to say const num2 set num2 is equal to useState. And I save, and React throws a hissy fit. useState is not defined. All right, that's fine. All I need to do, pop up here and import my useState from React. Good to go. Oh, excuse you. Just to refresh, fix that. Okay, so we've got it here, and I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3, and we've got our add 'em up button. So let's just console log our num1 and our num2 and pop open our console and type in 4, 5, 6, and I click my add 'em up and I get undefined, undefined. Okay, well, let's break this up because we just tested a couple different things there. We added our on click, we called it add one. We defined our add one as a function up here, and we got our console log working. So even though it's logging out undefined, we did prove that our on click is working. So, we celebrate different errors. We take that and we go, all right, we got that working. Why isn't num1 or num2 defined? So we've got our useState and we've got our inputs, but how do the inputs know to wire up to our state? They don't, right? Our inputs are here, but at no point did I say, hey, input, go save into num2 or num1. So we have to wire that up. We just created those state objects, but we didn't then tell it, hey, go put the data in there when we type. So what we are going to do is we are going to say, hey, on change, I'd like you to do something. I would like you to be able to type basic syntax. Okay, here we go. I would like you to do something on change. So I'm going to add in a little function there, and I am going to say set num1. And whenever we use an on change, the first parameter is always the event. So you will commonly see someone just call it E and go on their merry way. I cannot stand one-word variables, so I'm going to call it EVT. EVT. And then I'm going to say set num1 to the event and look at the target. Okay, the event is something happened, the on change. What did that happen on is the target. So the target is going to be this entire num input. And then we use one more thing, and that is dot value. because the value of the input is the text that is typed into it. So we are going to say dot value, and I am going to save that, and I am going to copy and paste and just change my num1 here. I'm going to save, going to come in here, going to refresh, and I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3, and we're good to go. Now, it is best practice, in addition to your on change, to also tell it the value is going to be equal to whatever is in the state, because we are updating the state, but we also want to tell React, hey, the value of this is whatever is in the state. So we're going to come down here and we're going to add a value, and our value is going to be equal to num2. And up here, we're going to add a value, and we would like our value to be num1. And now we get an error in our console. Now, if I refresh, it still works, but it's yelling at me. It's saying a component is changing an uncontrolled input to a controlled input. What an uncontrolled input means is we didn't specify a value. And to start, we look at our code and we go, yeah, we specified a value. It's right there. What are you talking about? That should be a controlled input. We're giving you the value. Well, the problem is that state starts out as null, right? It's empty. There's nothing in it. So we can fix that by just adding an empty string, because an empty string is not null. It's not undefined. It's saying, hey, the thing I would like you to start as is this empty string. So if I come over here and I refresh to clear my console, I can type in 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, and I don't have any problems. And to prove this, I can add in 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6 into my initial state. And when that refreshes, it proves that I am a little liar. All right, officially confused. Oh, it would help if I added my value to the input and not to the button. Okay, now I've got my default values in there. See, it's important to know where you're putting your code. Okay, so we've got our numbers in here, and I can click add them up and look what I'm getting. I'm getting my 1, 2, 3 and my 4, 5, 6. All right, so I now have access to them, and I can, of course, change this and push it down and hit add them up, and they're showing up there. So I'm going to take a break here. I will copy and paste this code for you guys. Into Slack. And I will blow that up one step. Hopefully you can see enough of it.
Yeah, I was talking about the Chrome console. I mean, that's helpful too, but like the warnings and stuff. Yeah.
And if we refresh that, our error goes away about them being uncontrolled. Okay, so let me just shrink this over a little bit. See if I can get it all the way. Yep. So I will leave that up, and I will kick off the poll so you guys can let me know if you're still working or you got it working.
Excuse me, Max.
Yep.
Is it okay just to watch? Like I could, after you did the Bootstrap, I completely lost you. So rather than copying and pasting all of them, if I just work through it tomorrow on my own. Okay.
Yep. Just on the poll, say no, but keep going.
Okay.
And then yeah, it's completely fine if I'm planning on setting up class like we did yesterday, where we are, there's 30 minutes at the end for you to do the homework. And the homework assignment for tonight is just to get the front end working, and making the calls and all of that stuff. So you can completely follow along. I will take breaks for people, just so if you want to catch up, you can. but it's also completely fine to sit back. And if you want, you can decide to change your mind and go, oh, maybe I will follow along now and just steal everything out of Slack and dive in. Oh, Susan, good point. I did not share the 2 places I added the code in index.html were the script tag all the way down at the bottom. And then I added the link tag in the head. But I will also share this in pasted code. And then the other things that I did is I deleted anything that was, excuse me, in app.js or in index.css, just so we weren't having competing styles. Okay, I'm getting a big vibe that most of the class just wants to watch, but I will give you guys a chance. I can slow down now if you do want to catch up.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
I was completely lost before. So you said you moved the script to the bottom of index HTML. You deleted everything from app.js?
App.css and index.css.
App CSS, okay.
And then in app.js, I deleted everything except literally the function at the top and the closing brace down at the bottom.
Mhm. And what was the other one? Index CSS?
Index CSS I deleted. Yes. Well, I deleted everything in it. I didn't delete the actual file.
Okay. And then do we need to keep these open, or can we, because I'm running out of like real estate.
The only thing you need to open is app.js.
Okay.
And the backend folder as well.
Yeah, that's a separate app.js. Okay, and then if you can just for the app.js, I'm sorry, I'm just not clear on what we deleted out of there.
Pretty much anything inside the function we deleted.
Oh, okay. So just the 2 imports up top, a closing bracket, and an export at the bottom?
Correct. And then everything that we just created here is in Slack if you want to copy and paste.
Okay, let me do that. Okay, thank you.
Would it be, give me a thumbs up if it would be helpful for me to talk through everything we just did, or give me an open mouth reaction if you want to just forge forward. Okay, sorry, went a little fast. Let's slow it back down and go back over it. Okay, so we had our since our last touch point, right? We created our React app, we got it running in the browser, we've got our backend running, we pushed it off to the side. We'll come back to that later. Whenever we create React app, React likes to give you this beautiful spinning logo, and it's like, get out of my way, I want to start writing code. So what we did is I went into my app.css and I cleared it out. I didn't delete the file because the import is still there, and then we'd be getting different errors. But I just cleared out the CSS. I also went to my index.css and I said, get out of here. Just clear it out. I don't want any of your styling. Next, I went into public, into my index.html, and I added 2 things. I added this link tag here to our Bootstrap, which I got on getbootstrap.com. I click get started. I came over to my CSS. I copied this and I dumped it right into the head tag in the public folder in index.html. Then for good measure, I came down here. I grabbed the bundle script tag. I scrolled down to the bottom and I dumped that in right before my closing body tag. Okay, now we've got Bootstrap in. So I headed over to app.js. And anything that was in this function, I cleared out. I didn't want the logo in there. I don't even want this import in here. Just get out of here. Just clear it out. So the first thing I did is I added an H1 in this return statement that says hello world. So when I save that and I come over to my browser, I wanted to make sure hello world was showing up, that it was on a white background, that there was no additional styling or fluff or anything like that. From there, I said, okay, I need the ability to type in 2 numbers. So if I type in 2 numbers, I need inputs to type them in. So I created this input, and all I did is I added the type of number. Okay. And so let me actually walk through this step by step. So this is what our index.css looks like. I can take this stuff out as well. Okay, so our app.js is cleared out. If I go over to my browser, I don't have anything. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add my each one of a hello world, save it, and come over here, showing up. Okay, now I need to get my inputs to show up. So I'm just going to do an input and add a type of number. And close that out. And I'm going to copy and paste that. And I have 2 inputs showing up, but they're not pretty. So I'm going to wrap everything in a div class container. And then I am going to add a class called form control, which is what Bootstrap, the name of the class is in Bootstrap to make the input fields pretty. And I'm going to drop that on my input container as well. And refresh. And now I got them rounded out. Okay, that's good, but we probably need some labels in there. So I'm just going to add a quick label that says num1 and copy and paste that and throw my num2 in there. Refresh, and I got my num1 and my num2 showing up. So I'm going to pause there and let anyone catch up and ask questions if you have decided to follow along now that I'm not at Roadrunner speed.
Max, should we have pulled down anything from the Careers in Code code base for Module 7?
Only the backend code, and only if you didn't catch up on the homework from last night.
Okay, because I just didn't know what files were what. Thank you.
Yep, we created all of these from scratch using Create React App. And you should only be seeing code in the React web browser, correct? We're not changing anything in the backend right now.
Okay, thank you.
So step 1, we needed to make our form input show up. Step 2, we need to now create a button in order for us to be able to actually say, hey, I'd like these 2 added together now. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to add my button. I'm going to use a class name of btn, and I'm going to say add them up. Okay. Now we run into the problem of I would like something to happen when I click on that button. So I'm going to add my on click, and my on click is going to be called add one. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to create my const add one, and that is going to be equal to a function. Now we run into the problem of, well, we need to access the values of whatever is typed in there. So we are going to use state for that, because whenever a number gets typed in on the keyboard, we want to update the state and be able to access that value. So I add my import use state up at the top of the file. And then inside my function component, I'm going to say const num1 and set num1 is equal to use state. and I'm going to start it as an empty value, right? I just want it to show an empty string in there. And then I'm going to do my const num2 and my set num2. And that is also going to be a use state with an empty value. Okay, now we've kind of created the placeholder for the state, but we need to wire it up to say, hey, when someone types something in, go record that into the state. So we come down here and we add an on change. And our on change is going to take a function because we could do multiple lines of code in here. And what we are going to do is we are going to set num1 to the event that you're responding to, go find the target that that event happened on, and grab the value out of it. And oh, by the way, because we're using event, we need to grab that from our onChange function. And because we are using an onChange, we also should add our value in here so it knows that it is equal to num1. Then we are going to take all of this, grab it, steal it down here, and just change it to our num2. And let Prettier do some magic for me. And then finally, all we need to do is console.log our num1 and our num2 in our onClick function. Come over here, I refresh. I forgot to add btn primary to my button. That's why it's not looking like a button. I'm type in 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6. And if I click add them up, I get my numbers logging out in the bottom.
Mel had a question in the chat. He wanted to know the type number if type number allows you to increment numbers as well.
Yeah, so you notice these little like spinner arrows that you can just click up and it adds and subtracts that. That is handled differently in every browser. There are some web browsers that will give you these. There are other ones that will style it differently. Some web browsers will not let you type letters into that input. So you notice if you click in here and type in ABC, it won't let you do it. There are other web browsers that will let you go in and type numbers. So type number is not consistent across browsers, but it is helpful in that it gives you this little spinner here in some web browsers. And for accessibility reasons, it also tells the screen reader, hey, whatever you type in here, I'm expecting numbers to get typed in. But yes, in answer to your question, Mel, the type number is what is giving you this up and down arrow and allows you to increment it. Okay, I'm going to relaunch the poll, and the goal is just to see if we got 2 more people across the finish line. All right, we did it. We got 2 more people across the finish line. I only have 9 responses though, so I'm going to give you guys 1 more minute to catch up if you need it. Nope, now I've got 10 responses. Okay. Was the second explanation, did things sink in a little bit more, even if you're not keeping up? Okay. One thing that I will do is I will, at the end of class, I will go back through and document my code. So you guys can actually read through it, see what the thought process is. I've heard from a couple students that it's like, I'm following, I'm understanding, but when I try and do it myself, I don't know where to start. And so what I'm going to go through on my code is kind of go through step by step, because yes, you could get that from the videos, but sometimes it's more helpful to see the finished product and just see kind of what the order I went in was, why we were adding that line of code, all of that stuff. So at the end of class tonight, I will go back through, document my code, and kind of write through number by number, step by step, what I was trying to do with each line of code. So hopefully that will provide a little insight. But anyway, I'm going to keep going here. So let's let's get our sum showing up, and then we're going to switch over to the back end. Because you could say, Max, why do we even need the back end? React can very clearly add two numbers together. And I would say, yes, but you're going to ruin all the fun of the back end module. So we're going to get our numbers showing up and adding together. And then we are going to overcomplicate things 10 times because that's what engineers always do. And we are going to add in the back end and get our ads working in practice with Fetch and all of that stuff. So I want my sum to show up. How am I going to get my sum to show up in my HTML? Set num. You got it, Kyle. We were using set num here as our state to set the numbers in. We now need a third piece of data in our state called sum that's actually going to show up the number. So I'm going to add my const here. I'm going to say sum and set sum and equal to use state. And we are going to come down here and I'm going to add it right up here. I'm going to say sum. Let's put it in a p tag because why not? Oop, not an o tag. And we are going to say sum colon, and then because we're not writing HTML and want the actual value of whatever's in the state to drop in, we're going to use our curly braces, and we are going to add in the word sum there. Now up in my add one, I am going to say set sum. I'm going to say set sum to num1 plus num2. And I'm going to come over here. I see my sum here. And you know what? It kind of looks weird empty there, right? So we can use the ternary operator to clean that up. We can say, hey, if there is a sum, then show the p tag and show the sum. Otherwise, don't show anything. Right? So that's an inline ternary operator. I did my curly braces to say, hey, this isn't just HTML. I want you to actually do some JavaScript magic here. Look to see if there is a sum. If there is a sum, then go show this entire p tag, which happens to have the number actually showing up in it. Otherwise, show nothing. So if I save and refresh, my sum disappears, and I type in 1 and 1, and I add them up. Well, kind of close there. Let's come back in here, and I'm going to console.log, and I don't know if you guys have been exposed to this yet, but we're going to use a JavaScript command called type of, and then we're going to say num1, right? And then we can do a comma here and also log out the number itself. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to refresh, I'm going to type in 1 and 1 and add them up, and 1 came out, but it's telling us, hey, the type, the variable type of num, is a string. And we're like, well, adding strings together just concats them, and that's why we're getting 11 here instead of 2. So all we need to do is throw a little parse int magic around our numbers. And parse int is parsing them from a string into an actual number. And now when we click add them up, we get 2. And I can increment that and add them up, and I get 3. Everyone, just 2 minutes there. Good question, Kyle. So if we say 1.5 plus 2, we still get 3. And if I say 1.9, I still get 3. And if I do 1.1, I get 3. So we should probably actually use parse float here, which will handle decimals for us. And parse int, parse float, 2 native JavaScript functions. That's why we don't have to import anything or write any of that logic. That's just baked right into JavaScript. So now we can do 1.1 and 1 and get 2.1 coming out. And I believe it will do the right thing. Yeah, and just show 2. So parse float, probably a better thing to use in that example. And I'm glad Ryan showed type of. That's one of those things that, like, I had been writing JavaScript code for 5 years and someone told me about type of, and I'm like, why did I never learn that earlier? So type of is a really helpful command. Okay, how are we feeling? Hopefully, mostly a review of React. We're going to layer in a little fun with the fetch, and then we will take a break. Okay, let's power through just because I know we're close to a break. So we've proven we can add the numbers together, but now we want to pull in our backend. We wrote all that cool code to add the numbers together, and we could send the data all different ways. Now we want to actually do that in practice. We want to have our front end send some data up to the back end, have the back end do all this super complicated math of adding two numbers together and send it right back. Sarcasm, by the way. Okay, so what we are going to do is we're going to practice with fetch. So fetch, gonna create a quick poll. Actually, I'll just do it through the emoji reactions. If you are more comfortable with async and await, give me a thumbs up. If you're more comfortable with promises and .then, give me an open mouth. Then we will do that. Pun intended. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to fetch, and fetch can be very simple. Fetch only requires one input, can support a lot more, but right off the bat, all we need to do is tell it what we would like to fetch. And the response is going to then come back with something. So we are just going to .then, we grab our response, and we're going to console log out our res. So you notice I didn't wire it up to anything here. I just want to get google.com, and I want to see what comes back with google.com. So I come over here, I refresh, I type in some numbers just because, I hit add them up, and I get a CORS error. And what it is telling me is that I am not allowed to access google.com because google.com is only accessible if I access it directly. Because I'm trying to access that code, we've run into this issue where I can't access it. So instead, what I am going to do is I am going to request from 3000. Well, what's 3000? That's our React app. So I'm literally saying just go out to yourself and go get whatever is there. So if I clear this and hit add them up, I get my response. Hey, response. That was a word we started to use yesterday, isn't it? Oh, it's starting to make some connections here. All right, let's open up our response. Our response came back, okay, true. Status 200. All right, now we're hopefully drawing some parallels to Ryan's module of HTTP status codes and 400s and 500s and all of that stuff. And if we look into our body, we get this thing called readable stream. Okay, well, that's not super helpful. So what we're going to do is we are going to type in fetch and JS, and we are going to go look at the official documentation. And what fetch is doing is it's saying, hey, here's a quick example. You can go out to example.com, movies.json. I'm curious if this actually works. No, it doesn't. Okay. And when we get our response back, we can parse out that JSON and then do another promise once the JSON is parsed out to actually get the data and work with the data just like a JavaScript object. But there are times that what we get back is not JSON, like is the case with our website, right? We're just getting HTML back. So instead, what we can do is use .text, because I was totally prepared and knew that off the top of my head. Okay, so we're taking the response back using the text, and then once we get the text, we can just console.log the text. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to type in 1. I'm going to type in 2. I'm going to add them up, and I get my console log here. What I forgot to do is I have to, I believe, return this. So the next promise function down there can actually work with it. So let me try that, add them up, and boom, we get all of this text showing up in the console. Okay, that's kind of a lot, but we've got our doc type and fave.ico and our description and all that stuff. Well, if we pop open our page source, you can see that that actually worked. It's actually pulling all of the text from what our React server is serving. Okay, that's all cool, but we don't want to just talk to our front end. We want to go talk to our back end. So we are going to say, hey, instead of going to 3000, go to 3001. I'm going to save. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to clear out my console. I'm going to add them up. Boom. We get another CORS error. All right. Well, the CORS error, we kind of worked around with Google and we said, all right, if Google's not going to let us, programmatically interact with them, that's okay. But this is our own server. Why can't we tell our own server, hey, it's okay if something comes in from localhost 3000, you can respond to that from 3001 and send it back to 3000. So what we do is we use a package in Express called CORS. And so you can see we have to require CORS. So I'm going to now move over to my backend code, make this window a little bigger. And because we need a package, what do we have to do? Install it. So in order to install it, we have to stop the server with Control-C, then npm install -save, --save or -s. And by the way, when I use npm I, that's a shortcut for install. And then I'm going to drop in the word CORS. So that was npm space I space -s space CORS. Okay, we have that installed. I'm going to restart my server before I forget. I have that up and running, and I'm going to pop over here, and CORS works just like body parser does. So we need to const pull in CORS and require that from CORS, and then we need to tell our Express app to use CORS. And so in order to do that, we just grab the CORS that we have from up here and call it as a function. Very similar to what we did for the body parser, except with body parser, we told it, hey, we want you to parse JSON specifically. Same thing over here. Oops. Okay, so all we did is we add in CORS. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to make sure my NodeMon did the right thing, rebooted the server. I'm going to close out of the CORS documentation, and I am going to refresh, and I'm going to do 1 and 2 and add them up. Hello world. Well, where did hello world come from? Oh, look, in my server, when I don't specify a root, I response.send back my hello world. That's pretty nifty. Sent some data from my front end. Just a basic request. I just said, hey, go out to 3001. Whatever comes back in this promise, grab it, figure out what the text is, then give it to this function and just console log it out. well, wait a second. If I can get hello world back, I should be able to add some things. So I'm going to come over here, and this is already a template literal. I'm using our backticks instead of quotes or single quotes. And I'm going to say, hey, add. And what would I like to add there? Well, I would like to add my num1 and my num2. I'm going to save that and go back to my browser. I'm going to add them up. Oh, I got 3. Got my response. Oh, okay. Well, if I've got my response, all I need to do is set my sum now in React world over to whatever comes back from the server text. So I pop over here, I refresh, I do a 1 and I do a 2 and I add them up and I get my sum. I can change it here, add them up, get my sum. And I can get really fancy just to prove that this is all working on the back end. I can come over here into my backend code. Let me expand this out a little bit. And I've got my 2 numbers that I'm adding together, but I can do something like subtract 1 just to prove that, the sum is actually happening over in the backend. I'm going to save that. My server reboots, go back into Chrome, and I can say 1 and 1, and I add them up. My sum is 1. Why is it 1? Well, it's adding 1 plus 1 and then subtracting 1. Okay, so there's a lot going on there. It is 7 o'clock and the perfect break time. So I'm going to paste my backend code into Slack. I'm going to paste my front end code into Slack. And then we are going to break it up a little bit because I want to make sure that everyone is understanding this, is understanding kind of how the data is getting sent and all of that. So I'm going to take a longer break. Let's say take a 15-minute break, be back at 7:15. And then I'm just going to sit here until 7:30, not cover anything new, and give you guys a couple minutes to hopefully catch up on this, feel a little bit more comfortable. And if you're not feeling comfortable and still want to wait until after class to work on it, just prepare a couple questions, right? Read through my code and make sure you understand where that code is happening. Why is it happening over here? Does my on-click work? What's this fetch doing? I don't understand this. Whatever it is, take a 15-minute break, kind of reset your head, and then we'll spend 7:15 until 7:30 on any questions. Sound good? Cool. See you guys in 15.
Max, I have a quick question. This is Sonia. So if we refresh our browser and we don't put any numbers in and we just hit add them up, should we see gobbledygook in there?
You're probably going to get not a number or, oh.
You see what it says, like the dot type and stuff? I was just like, is it supposed to be doing that? And then are we still looking at a number 3 in our other browser? I just keep feeling like I missed something. Nothing has changed as far as what's on our 3001 port, right?
Except the cores.
Right. We added that in, but nothing has changed on that browser. So okay.
Correct. Yeah, you can close the 3001 in your browser. That was just to make sure that the server was running and you can connect to it. So you can close that out. The only thing we're doing in the browser is on 3000 is in React.
Okay, and will we be looking anything else up? Will we still need another browser?
Probably not.
Okay, thank you.
Susan, you have a question? Okay.
No, I accidentally just hung up.
Okay.
Sorry.
I am back and I am here. If anyone has any questions. We're not going to get going on any new content until 7:30. So if you want to use this time to catch up to what I have, that is fine. If you want to use this time to pick apart what I have shared in Slack and make sure you have understanding of that, that is also completely fine.
Max, you're waiting for questions?
I am.
I put a few different things in the chat so as not to disrupt. If
So to open the other VS Code window, you just need to go to File, New Window. And once the window opens up, you should be able to File, Open, and then find the backend folder.
backend folder.
Yes, the Add Server folder.
Okay, I'm confused. Oh, there's add front end and then there's add server.
Correct. The Add Server is the backend code.
Okay, and that's the only one I need to pull down for the second window.
Correct.
That explains it. I just got to find it. Okay. All right. And I may have had a couple other questions in there if you get bored. Thank you.
I answered the what files. It's app.js on the front end and app.js on the back end.
Different capitalization.
Yep.
Yep.
And I answered whatever you had in Slack in Slack.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Anyone else have questions? Feel free to throw it in the chat as well. Can answer anything coming in there. And even if you don't have a specific question, if you just have a line of code that you don't understand or want me to go through the steps of a process again, feel free to ask about that as well. You don't always use backticks for fetch, Latonia. It's common to see backticks, or that the technical name for that is the template literal. because it is common to want to add some data into the URL, the endpoint URL or the route. The reason why we use backticks in that example code was so that we could get num1 and num2 to show up in there. So more old school code would use just double quotes, and then they would close out the quote, hit plus, they would put in whatever number they wanted in there, and then do another plus and continue that out. And so you would get this very messy URL because you were adding all of these variables in there. So it's common to see template literal in modern code used for the URL because we end up just dropping in those variables. With that said, I do know some companies that are have code style guides of like how they prefer it. And some companies are now saying never use single quotes or double quotes, just use backticks for everything, because the computer processes it so fast that there's no downside to using backticks as opposed to using quotes, only because the backticks allow you to drop in variables. But template literal is just like a string, only it allows you to use the $ curly braces and put in the variable name. And so if you wanted, you could write that out as a regular string and not use the backticks, and fetch would work exactly the same. There's no shame in asking for something to be repeated. If you need an explanation or think you have it, but you just want to hear it one more time, happy to talk through any of the code. I'm realizing that that last answer I gave, Latonia asked, do you always use backticks for fetch? I didn't read the question aloud. So in case you were wondering what that answer was to, it was to the question, do you always use backticks for the URL? Latonia, there are not really limits to what you can include in a ternary operator. You can even do a ternary operator inside a ternary operator. But I know a lot of companies tell you not to do that because you get to the point of like being like, if this and this and this, and wait, I'm lost. Am I in the question mark or am I in the colon part of this? Or so my general rule, and we do have a company style guide where when someone commits code like that, I can actually go back to our style guide and go, no, this is against our rules. Do not put a ternary operator in a ternary operator. I can't read this code. Someone else down the road can't read this code. You probably can't read this code when you're coming back to it. So just because it works doesn't mean that it's okay, right? And I think that goes to the beautiful code presentation from yesterday, right? Of it's not just a visual code that matters. It's actually the readability of it and being able to understand it, better debugging, all of that kind of stuff as well. So in answer to your question, there aren't really limits of what you can put in a ternary operator. You just want to make sure that it's concise enough that you can understand it in one line and you're not trying to shove too much in. There are definitely times that I've got an advanced ternary operator going on, even if it's an if-else, where I just pull all of that code up and decide not to use the ternary operator. So let me actually show you an example of how you could do that. So we've got our ternary operator up here. What I can do is I can say if sum and come up here and say like let sum to show. And then I can say if the sum, then the sum to show is going to be equal to a p tag that shows the sum. And we can let num to show default to null. And then we can take out this entire ternary operator and say num to show. And if we look at our code, do our 1 and our 2, we add them up and we get our 3 showing up. But if I refresh the page, you notice it's blank up there. And I realize I forgot to put in my word sum. So I can come over here, refresh. Sum doesn't show up until I add my 2 numbers in, and then sum shows up. So that's just an example of I had my ternary operator, which I'm going to put back in here as sum. And if the sum exists, then show this p tag. Otherwise, show null. But it is possible to extract that ternary operator out into above your return and then do all the logic up there and just shove it in a new variable and show that down here. So that's an option and something I will frequently do if I need a multi-level if statement and if, else if, else if, else. I will do all of that logic before the return and then just dump the right stuff in the actual return. Great question. Two more minutes before I cover anything new. Any other questions? Give me a quick thumbs up if you are caught up to where I am and you have everything working.
Max, I just was wondering if you probably had a quick answer. I missed something with the sum where I'm returning the index document, the index HTML.
Yep.
For sum, and I'm trying to look through the posted code, but I just, it's not popping out at me.
The only thing we added to index.html is the Bootstrap. Are you talking about app.js?
Yes, I missed something in app.js, but it's returning on localhost 3000 when I enter the sum for 1 + 2. It has sum, and then it has the whole doc type for index.html.
Go ahead and share your screen.
I do this from a tablet, but let me, I don't know.
Can you, is it easier to copy and paste your code into Slack?
Yes, it is. Just let me do that. Slack. That's my app.js on the front end.
Okay, that is looking good. So in order to debug, what I would do is open up a new tab and go to your localhost 3000/add/1/2. And this is a really good question, right? Of like, I'm getting some weird thing back from the server. It's not the number that I expect. What we have to do now is isolate the problem. So we have to say, is this a problem in the front end or a problem in the back end? And so in order to isolate it to the back end and see if it's a problem there, we're going to try and load the URL just in a separate tab away from our front end.
So you said 3000/add/
3001, because we moved our server over to 3001. So it didn't conflict with React, which was over on 3000.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
No, it didn't. It's not running. I think when I ran cores, I didn't start the NodeMon backup. That's my problem. All right, thank you.
And so the reason why I say share your screen, share your code, let's talk through it, is hopefully that you learn from the other students, right? Because that's a very common problem of like, all right, now I'm getting weird stuff showing up. Simple as the server's not running, right? But this is these are common problems that hopefully we all share in and we all learn from. Real success now. Awesome. Okay, we're going to keep going here. I don't have a ton more content to cover. I am going to get our other two methods working, that our other two endpoints working, talk through how we want to send that data up to the server, get it to show up just like we're doing right now. We're going to talk a little bit about the headers that we need to set in order to get the last method to work. I'm going to add a couple more buttons just so we can click on it and get the right endpoints working. And then I am going to go through and add in the comments that I said that I would do earlier, starting all the way from the beginning and just going step by step and saying what we are trying to accomplish. Hopefully that will be a good overview. If you've been following along everything in class and you think that you can do this without the video and do it from start to finish, you can get out of here early. If you think it will be helpful to hear all of those steps one more time and see me type out the comments, stick around. But before we get to that, because I've got you for another hour, well, 57 minutes, I am going to add in the other two endpoints just so we can see all three of them working. Okay, so what we covered before was this add endpoint. Can someone tell me what kind of parameters we're using in this in the endpoint that I'm not sharing my screen for? In this endpoint, what kind of parameters are those? Those are the root parameters, R-O-U-T-E, not R-O-O-T. But bring up a good point because we use the word root and root with an E at the end of it. The root endpoint here is actually this, right? Whenever we have the slash without anything after it, that is what we call the R-O-O-T, the root of the base of everything. Meanwhile, when we talk about these parameters, those are like the route, the R-O-U-T-E parameters. And you can pronounce route or as root, and obviously some confusion there. So I'm glad that that came up. When we talk about the ROOT, we're talking about the endpoint, the URL without anything after it. And when we're talking about the route, the ROUTE, we're talking about the name inside of here. And if we're saying route parameters, we're talking about the :num1, :num2. So glad that that came up. Okay. So yes, we just did an example using the route parameters. Now we need to use our query parameters. So I'm going to come over here. And while I'm in here, I'm going to just add the number 1 to my button. And I'm going to add 2. And I'm going to add 3. And I'm going to change my on-click to 3 and 2, just so we have separate functions that are running for each time we click on a button. And I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to do my const add 2. And I'm going to throw console log in there. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add my const add 3. And I'm going to console log my 3. I'm going to switch over to my browser. I have my buttons here. I'm going to click on 2 and I get 2 logging out. And I'm going to click on 3 and I get 3 logging out. Now you say, Max, that's crazy. All you did is add a couple buttons and get your functions in there. Why did you test that? Why don't you just write your code? Well, I can tell you from experience, I have done this, added in a couple of buttons and spent hours debugging why I was clicking on this button and it wasn't coming out because I had the on clicks wired to the wrong one. So that's why it's the smallest testable code. You want to switch over and test it, right? So all I did in my code in my front end code was I added in my console log 2, my console log 3, and all I wanted to test was make sure the buttons were there and the on click was running. So breaking it down into those smallest testable pieces is important. Okay, we are going to do a similar fetch here. So we're going to fetch, and fetch needs to know as the first parameter what it's fetching. So I'm going to do my localhost 3001. I'm going to specify that I am going to use my add to function or endpoint. And I've got add to here. And without cheating of what comments I left on the screen, how do we use a query parameter? What is different about a query parameter than a route parameter? Yes, we use the question mark and the ampersand in the URLs. So we're going to say question mark. And now I need to make sure that whatever my backend code is using, I'm using those same keys. So I'm going to come over to my backend, and my add to isn't using num1 and num2 like we were using from the route parameters. It is using .query, first num and second num. And so we need to make sure that those are matching over in the front end, because otherwise it's going to try and pull that information in and won't be able to look in the right key. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say first num is equal to my num1. And again, I'm using that equal to because that is how query parameters are written. And then I'm going to do my ampersand because I need to send in a second piece of information. And that is going to be my second num. And that is equal to num2. Okay, we're going to follow what we did above. We are going to say dot then get the response and turn the response into text. And let me, oops. And then get that text and set the sum equal to the text. So just like we did up here. I'm going to save that. I'm going to pop over to my React. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to type in 4 and 5 and add them up. And I got my sum. And I hope someone has shown you the network tab already, but if not, it's probably worth going back into that. You see here, we have our add to, and it's showing us first num and second num, and it actually dropped in those values for us. And if we click on that, we can see the response up here that got sent back from the server, which was a 9. And if we go into the headers, we can actually see the entire request URL, the fact that we did a get, which fetch defaults to, by the way, and we can see that the response was a 200, and then any of the response headers that came back from the server as well. So all kinds of interesting information in here. And if we go all the way down, we can see our query string parameters, and we can see that our first num and our second num were set in. Super helpful tab in Chrome to be able to see the network. Sometimes you can't figure out whether it's your front end or your back end working, or you may not have access to the front end code. So you go into your network tab and you can kind of snoop around and figure out what data is getting sent, if it's an issue of the data not going up, or if it's an issue with the data coming back, or something like that. Fun fact, I actually got an iPhone. I got a pre-order in even though the stock was wiped out, all because I was able to use the network tab and figure out the way they were sending the data back. And so they were like sold out of this iPhone, but I was able to use the network tab to just say stock, and I changed it from false to true. And it literally let me put my entire order through. That was an issue that they fixed the following year, but I went into the Syracuse Apple store to pick it up. And they were like, how did you get this model? It's sold out everywhere. Like, how did you do this? And it was like, well, you had a security issue on your website, and I was able to just kind of see that and tweak it and get it to work. So really cool stuff that you can do inside your network tab. Really helpful for debugging. And you can even see kind of how apps are working and what data they're sending back and forth, and kind of dig into the JSON that they normally are sending back and forth. Okay, we've got 2 working. I'm going to take a quick break and let anyone ask questions on that before we move on to the 3rd one, which is probably the most complicated, but not too bad. And again, this is all using all the backend code that we used yesterday. The only change that we have made to the backend code is to allow cores to work. And so hopefully this is showing you a kind of a good example of, it's possible that your backend is all complete and you can wire up your front end and add in that functionality. Or what we're going to show tomorrow is we can also work in reverse. We can have our front end entirely done and then go build out our entire backend. So this kind of can work in 2 directions. So our route parameters are up here, our ROUTE, and then our query parameters are down here. And we know they're query parameters because they are using the question mark, have a key name, use an equal, and then have whatever the value is. Okay, we're going to move on to the 3rd example. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to remove my console log 3. And just like we've been doing before, we're going to fetch. And I'm going to fetch my local host 3001. And I am going to add 3. And no shame in jumping over here and reviewing whatever this code is. And what we are doing is we are looking in our rec.body. Okay, now we get into something interesting, because we're not just dumping it in the URL via a query parameter or a route parameter. We're sending it in the body of the request. Well, if it's in the body of the request, what's making the request? Fetches. So we now need to tell fetch, hey, we're doing something different here. So what we're going to do is we are going to add a 2nd parameter to fetch that comes in as an object. And we are going to tell it, hey, we would like to post. So we're not getting anymore because that's what the default is. We need to post. 1, because it matches post over in our backend. So Express knows that's the kind of method it's supposed to respond to. But also because we can't use a body in a GET request. We have to use some other method like post in order to get access to the body. Okay, so we come down here and now we add our body. Now our body is expecting num1 and num2. So we're going to drop in our body, say num1 is equal to, it's actually equal to num1, and num2 is equal to num2. Because that's coming in from our state up at the top, just like it was coming in from our state on the other 2. And then we are going to get our response, and we are going to return our res.text. And then we are going to get our text and set it in sum to our text. Okay. There are at least 4 problems with this code. The reason I wrote it like this is so we can practice reading the error messages and figuring out how we can work through them. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to click my atom up 3, and I get error connection refused. Okay, well, I come back over here. My server is running. What's the problem? So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to look localhost 3. Nope, that's localhost 30,001. Okay, problem 1. We're going to go back to our VS Code and fix my typo and be at 3001. But again, the importance of that is looking at this error message and going, error connection refused. Okay, I've run into that before when the server isn't running, but why else would the connection be refused? Oh, because I'm not using the right URL, right? So the idea here is to not just go, oh, I've got an error, but to understand what that error is trying to tell you is the problem. So I'm going to refresh just in case. I'm going to do 4 and 5, and I'm going to add them up 3. I'm going to go back to my VS Code, remember to save, then go back and add in some numbers, add them up 3. And now I get sum, null, foo, bar, my array, A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay. Sum is null, though, and we want just the sum to show up. So we've got way too many things going on here. We want to get our sum working first, and then we can break it apart from there. So let's go into our network tab, and I'm going to look at my add 3, and I'm going to scroll down to my request payload. And what do I see here? Object. Object. Well, no, I told it to send num1 and num2. Well, what did I say about the internet before? The internet can't really send JSON. It can't really send XML. It can only send a string. And so what we need to do is actually JSON.stringify this. Okay, so we are taking whatever our JSON is, we're converting it into a string, and now when Fetch gets it, it's going to be all happy because it's a string getting sent up. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to clear out my network. I'm going to click the add them up 3. I'm going to pop this open. I scroll down, and hey, there are my numbers. Great. It's still sum null. Well, that's not good. Let's come back over here. And I'm going to add in my console log. I've got my rec.body. I'm going to clear the server, start it back up just so we know it's cleared out. We know what's happening there. I go to my browser, scoot this over so we can actually see that maybe. I click add them up 3, and I get an empty object. Well, we have body parser up here. And we told Express, hey, expect some JSON coming in, but we've got a problem. The problem is that Express is getting that data in, and it's just a string to it. It doesn't know that it is JSON. So we actually have to tell it in the request, hey, by the way, the content type that I am sending you up is JSON. So that when you know it's JSON, parse it out so we can get it in the body. And so what we have to do is go back to our front end code and say, hey, don't only use post, don't only use the body, also use some headers. And the headers we want to set are something called content type. And the content type is application/JSON. And Kyle, to your point, it is exactly what we did in Postman when we changed that dropdown. It's from, we clicked raw and then we clicked text and changed it to application JSON. If you actually go to the headers type in Postman, you can actually see that they added a header for us called content type application JSON. Okay, so we're going to save that. We're going to go back to our backend, still running. I'm going to hit add them up 3. And now look what we have in our console log. We've got our num1 and our num2 coming out. All right, that's pretty cool. I'm going to go back to, I'm going to throw a quick parse int in here because you realize that those are coming in as strings. They aren't coming in as numbers. So I'm going to throw a quick parse int in here, or a parse float if you want to support decimals. That's completely fine. All right, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to come back to my front end. I'm going to hit add them up. and I get my sum as 27. All right, one more step here. I've got foo, bar, my array. I've got my backend sending back all kinds of information that I don't care about. And by the way, that will happen frequently. You'll be working with an API and they're going to provide you all of this data, and you may not have control over the API. You may be using someone else's API. So you just learn to ignore the rest of the data and dive into only the piece that you care about. So we're going to do that. But we have a problem in our front end that we're working with text. And it's like, well, I don't want to do a substring or that's JSON. So we can change our method here to say, hey, when you get the response back, don't treat it as text, treat it as JSON. And now if I console log, and I'm going to change this parameter to say data, and I console log out my data, when I come over here and clear everything, go to my console, clear that, add them up. Now I've got my object. And I know it's an object because I can click on it here and see it expand and get access to what I care about. All right, all that's cool. So all we have to do is in our code, set our sum equal to the data.sum. And it's very common, by the way, to throw this console log in here and dig through the data, figure out what you want to show up, and then actually do that in your code. I'm going to save, going to come back over here, refresh, type in some numbers, add them up, and I get my 6. Now, looking at all of this, you can go, my God, look at how much more code we have to add here for just the body parameter. That seems like a ton. The fact of the matter is this is the dominant way we send information to and from APIs, because chances are you're not going to be just sending 1 or 2 numbers to the backend, and chances are you're not going to only be getting 1 number back from the backend. You're going to be getting arrays, and those arrays have messages in them. You're going to be getting objects that have arrays that have objects that have arrays in those objects, right? The nature of data is that it's going to be very nested and there's going to be a lot of it. And that goes for information you're sending in your request to the backend. And that goes for information that you're pulling back and pulling apart the JSON for. So while this looks like a lot of extra code, it does allow us to both send and receive JSON to and from the backend, which is why it is so much more powerful. So when we look at this, we've got our root just like we did before. We had to say, hey, we're posting something, and it's saying, what do you want to post? Well, because we have got to send it as a string, we JSON.stringify this object that we want to send up in the body. We then need to tell our our Express server, hey, what we're sending you, it's coming in as a string, but really the content type of that string is JSON. And so because we added this content type into the header, body parser now knows, oh, what's coming in is JSON. I can pull that apart from you and dump that into the rec.body. We then get a response, and because our response is not just text, it's sending back some JSON, we use .json instead of .text. And then finally, we are able to access the sum key that came back in our JSON response data, and we can set sum just like we did before. That's it. That's all I have for you. Thank you and good night. Just kidding. So you guys got your first server working yesterday and created 3 endpoints. And today you built a React app from scratch that used your own API endpoints and showed that data on the screen. So just take that as a moment to kind of feel accomplished. You know, it's like, all right, we made a front end that's talking to our back end and showing that data up. That's pretty cool. And give anyone, oh yeah, I can share in Slack. And I'm not sharing the back end because we didn't make any changes to that other than adding course. So I'm going to give everyone 4 minutes. Use it as a break. Use it to read over this code. See if you have any questions. If you do, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, at 8 o'clock, I will start going through my code step by step and saying what I added and why. And
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and if you are feeling good about this, if you think you understand it all, if you think either you have followed along the whole time, or you think you've got a good understanding and want to just dive into homework, feel free to drop out now. The homework is literally going to be just getting your front end set up and working with the 3 endpoints. So if you're feeling good about that, attendance wise, you're good to go now, and you're welcome to go start working on homework. But I will talk through every step that we just did tonight, boiling down the past 2.5 hours into hopefully 30 minutes, and hopefully going through as a refresher for everyone. Go ahead, Kyle, with your question.
I was just going to say, it makes sense that most of the requests are the add 3 method on the internet, but the add 2, is that would be used for a search, like of your website or something?
Really depends on how the API is set up. So it's common to use, well, it's common to use all 3 of them. It's common to see route parameters if you're requesting a specific ID and want to just get a piece of information back. It's common to see query parameters on GET requests, mainly because GET requests don't support the body. And so there needs to be a way to pass some additional information in other than just the route. And then it's very common to see post requests with headers and JSON passing back and forth because it's easy to pass large amounts of data, both uploading it and downloading it using JSON. So very common to see all 3 of these. It was not just teaching for the sake of saying, here are all the options. It is actually something that gets used, and you would read the API documentation to figure that out. Or if you're building your own API, you kind of want to say, all right, what makes the most sense? Am I just using an ID? And if I'm just using an ID, I'll throw it in the route. If I'm using a GET request, I have no option. I've got to do it as parameters, as query parameters. And if I'm sending a big chunk of information, I'll just do that in a post request.
And then actually another question I had more about the back end was, so we can't send a post request to add 1 or add 2 because we haven't set that up, right? You have to set that up before you can do that?
Correct. Yep, and we can demonstrate that because we can throw in an object in our add 2 that just says method is post. And if I come over here and I add them up too, I get a 404 not found because it can't find a post request there. It can only find the GET request there. And yes, Ariel, the live stream should be viewable already on YouTube. If you just go to the Hack Upstate channel, it should appear there. The name it won't have the date in it, but it will literally say currently live, and you should be able to rewind on it. And then Dana should post the YouTube link tomorrow as well, but it should be there and already accessible. Oh, I hesitate to ever say the word always, but almost always I use fetch. Historically, I use a package on NPM called request that I used for the backend in Node because the Node did not have fetch built into it. So if you wanted your API or your server to talk to someone else's server without a front end involved, it's common to do that, right? It's common for me to say, oh, I want some weather information on my backend. I'll go get an API, go get that weather information, parse it on the back end, and then add that into whatever is going to show up on the front end. And so for a long time, I used a package called Request. Request has been depreciated in favor for newer packages like Axios and a package called Node Fetch, which literally gives you the same exact fetch functionality that you have on the front end and adds it to the back end. And so I have migrated over from Request to Node Fetch for two reasons. One, Request was depreciated. And so at some point that code is going to break and I'm not going to be able to update to a fix. And then two, because the syntax is the same. So because I'm so familiar with fetch syntax on the front end, it's beneficial to be able to use that same syntax on the back end. And so I always use fetch, or at least in the past 2-ish years, I have always used fetch. With that said, I do not want to discount Axios, right? One of the major benefits Fetch has over Axios is that we didn't have to npm install Axios. We didn't have to import it. We just started using Fetch and it worked, at least on the front end. On the back end code, yes, you do have to install Fetch. So that's why I like using Fetch. I haven't ever found functionality that Axios has that Fetch does not have. So I almost always use Fetch, but that is not to say that Axios is a bad option. And if that makes more sense to you than the Fetch syntax, you are welcome to use Axios in this assignment and in future assignments as well. Correct, Brielle, the add front end app.js is the homework for tonight. And I will create a Google Classroom assignment for it around 8:30. Other questions I can ramble on about before going through step-by-step of my code?
Excuse me, Max.
Yep.
It's Latonia. I think I missed something. I'm trying to, my eyes are starting to cross trying to compare, but when I do the add for 1 and 2, they add the numbers, but when I do the add for number 3, it just puts them together.
Okay. I did
You know
lie.
how it like it just puts the numbers next to it.
I lied. I said I did not change anything in the back end. I did change one line in the back end other than the course. And that is I just sent a code snippet in Slack in the pasted code channel. I did add a parse int to rec.body.num1 and rec.body.num2. My bad.
No worries. I had started it and then I thought, why do I have one of them and not the other? So I took it out. So I must have saw that you did it. And then thank you.
No problem. The reasoning behind that is that whenever we pull a value from a text input, it pulls it back as a string. And so we could technically parse int that on the front end instead of changing the back end. And that would also work. So you could parse the number from a string into a number on either the front end or the back end, and it would work fine. Just consistency wise, we had parsed them already for add 1 and add 2. So I just add the parse for add 3. Yes, Carolyn, front end and back end servers should be running simultaneously. And that's a very common thing to do. In fact, the first thing that I do when I get into work in the morning is I run a command called v3 front start, and that fires up my React server and fires up our front end. And then I open a new terminal tab and I type in v3 back start. And that fires up my Node and Express server and gets all of that working. So and connects to the database and does all of that stuff. So if you're wondering why I know all of these things off the top of my head, it's because this is literally what I use at work. The only difference is that our backend is about 150,000 lines of code. Latonia asked if there are any aspects of code that I do not know. Absolutely. I will answer that question in two ways because I love to hear my own voice. Just kidding. There are aspects of code that I just don't know concepts of, or I know enough DevOps to be dangerous. I know how to get my code up and running on a server and get it working in Google Cloud or AWS, but I'm not a DevOps expert. I do not, know ways to optimize or ways to, set up load balancing or manage multiple servers and all of that stuff. That is outside of my expertise. Same goes for security. I know the basic concepts of security. I can set up a login system from scratch. I know that I need to securely store my passwords, but I'm not a penetration tester. I don't know enough to look at someone else's system and try and figure out where the holes are and get into their system. You could argue those are aspects of code. They are in parallel sectors or similar sectors. So there are definitely aspects of coding that I am not an expert in, and I either know enough to get by, or I can say I know nothing about that. You've got to ask someone else. That's the first answer to the question. The second answer to the question is, are there pieces of code at my company that I do not know? And for the first 3-ish years, the answer was no. You could ask me a piece of say, what does this code do? And because I wrote it and because I had written it in the past 3 years, I can go, oh, that code does A, B, and C. Well, the team in the past year has grown. We at one point had 4 developers working on code. So there was code that I did not write and needed to go in and read. And we also hit a point where I had been working on this code for 6 years. And so you'd ask me something about the code, and I go, I wrote that code 4 years ago. Like, I'm amazed that it's still working. Or, oh, it's not working. I need to remember what I did 4 years ago. Or, oh, I need to remember what I did 4 years ago and someone changed a year ago and I, didn't see that code change. So the answer to both is yes, there are definitely aspects of code that I don't know. And that goes for both industry topics and stuff like that, and for my own code. Even if no one else had written it or modified it, there are things off the top of my head where I'm like, I've got to go back and read that or look up my own documentation that I wrote in order to be able to answer a work question or something that, one of our users has a question about. And to that point, when a bug request comes in, it's like, it doesn't matter how well I know my own code, it's broken. So I've got to figure out where it's broken. So that's probably the third answer. There is nothing wrong with saying I do not know. And my boss has learned not to ask this question, but the CEO of the company asks me all the time, can you? And it doesn't matter what he is asking, can you? The answer is always yes. What he really means to be asking is, how long will it take to? Because if he came to me and said, can you build a video game for me? I would say yes. I've never built a video game before in my life, but I know the concepts of programming. I know that you can do it. I can go out and learn a programming language and learn all about the art direction and figure out how to do physics and all of that kind of stuff. Never done it before, can totally do it. Probably going to take me a couple months, right? And so whenever the question of can you gets asked, I always reframe it to, how long would it take you to? Because it is up to the business or your project manager or your team lead or whoever it is to figure out if that time investment and therefore the cost investment is worth it to actually build out that feature. Jahil, yes, when you launch your server on the web, you would definitely use a domain name, and that will be covered in the DevOps module coming up in right after the database and Node, I'm pretty sure DevOps is next. And then security may come after that. So like 6-ish weeks from now, you're going to be in, I believe, AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is the largest cloud provider, learning how to what we call spin up a server or an instance of a server, how to deploy your code onto it, and then how to link your domain to your code and get all of that running. And thank God I am not the one teaching about reverse proxying, because that blew my mind when I learned about it. How can you get multiple servers on multiple URLs or on multiple ports responding to multiple different domain names, which happens a lot. And so, you know, everything's running on port 80 because port 80 is the port the web uses. Or 443, which is the port HTTPS uses. But if you've got one port 80 and you want to have multiple domains running on multiple servers, how do you manage all of that? That is when you use a concept called reverse proxying. And you are going to have to ask the instructor about that in module 9, 10? Forget what DevOps is. But Shahir, good question. Yes, the short answer is yes. You would use your domain to map your domain using DNS to your server. You think coding is a circle of hell, configuring a server is the next. All right, we'll give 2 more minutes for questions, and then I will start going through my code number by number. Carolyn, what files aren't loading? The backend files or the front end files?
All of the above.
Karen, are you available to do a breakout room with Carolyn?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Max.
No problem. If you're still having problems at 8:30, circle back into this room and I can help you
Okay.
back in here.
Yeah, I don't know if I moved something or what, because it worked fine yesterday, you know, going to the local host and everything. So, all right. Thank you.
No problem. All right, last chance for questions before I start shoving two and a half hours now into 15 minutes instead of 30 minutes. You thought I went fast tonight. Wait until you see me trying to hit a deadline. All right, I am going to move this code over to my primary monitor so I don't have to crane my neck and reshare. Where did it go? That's my server, this is my front end. Okay. And again, if you want to drop out, if you want to work on the assignment and you can't stand me talking through all of this one more time, feel free to drop and the homework assignment will be up. I will post the feedback URL before I get started on this in case you want to fill that out early-ish. Boo, 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 boo. Yes, I do talk to myself all day as I work. I like to tell myself I'm not crazy, but aren't we all just a little crazy, especially as developers? Okay, let's dive in. So, first things first, we went to index.html and we added our number 1, add Bootstrap CSS. Then we came down into our script tag and we, number 2, add our Bootstrap JS. I'm not going to go through the create React app steps. I'm only going to be focusing on the code stuff. Number 3, clear out app.css. And then number 4, clear out index.css. Then I'm going to go into my app.js and clear out so I'm going to say from the boilerplate. Boilerplate is anything that you get. It's kind of like the template that you get when you first do your create React app. So I just cleared out anything in our app.js. I added my Bootstrap in from the previous steps. I cleared everything else out, and I think I'm good to go to get rocking and rolling in here. Okay, so number 6 was I added add container and hello world to make sure CSS is working. CSS and Bootstrap, really. Okay, I got those showing up, and so I'm going, all right, I'm good to go. Now I need to type in 2 numbers. Well, how do I type in my 2 numbers? I'm going to that was 5. This is 6. This is 7. Create 2 inputs with type number and class name for styling. So I got my 2 inputs showing up. That's great. Now I need to know what those 2 inputs are about. So I do a number 8, add labels for inputs, and I go, great. Now I've got 2 numbers typed in there and want something to happen. So number 9 is I create my button with class names for styling. And then once I confirm that those are showing up in the browser, I add my on click. So something happens when we click on it. And then number 11 is I create my on click function and console log to make sure it's wired. Okay, great. I have my function added in here. Now I have the problem of where I can't access what's been typed in. So what do? I come down and I say, well, if I want to access that data, I've got to create my state. So let me just move 5 up here. So number 13 is I create num1 and num2 from use state. And if I'm using state, I need to number 14 import use state. Okay, so now I've got my state created, but I've got to wire it up to the inputs. So I come down to my input and I number 15, add on change that sets event target value into my state. But because I am setting it into state, I also need to number 16, add value from state. By the way, you can interrupt me at any of these steps if you're curious or not following along, or I'm not sure what I'm doing. Or just want to call me crazy. Okay, so now we've got our state working. Now we want to prove that our state is working. So I'm going to come down here and for number 17, add console log num1 and num2 to make sure they come out when the button is pressed. Okay. Once I get that working, I go, all right, we've got everything here. We now need to make sure we've got a place to show our sum. So up here, I'm going to do a number 18. And I am going to show how tired I am by not being able to type. And I'm going to create some in state. And then I am going to come down here and say, you set sum to make sure we can show result. And then I come down to here and I say, number 19, add sum, ternary, no way that's spelled right, and spell check is not going to be helpful, is it? All right, we're going to keep going. Add ternary operator optional. Thank you. Way too many R's in there. To show up from state when we change it in the on click. Okay, so we just added our sum, so that will now show up. And so in theory, because we use set sum to show the result, that should be working. So we now 20. Get rid of all the code in this function and start from scratch to use endpoint instead. Okay, so we clear out this function and now we're ready to go on the fetch. So we look at our backend code to get the proper route and figure out how to send data. And in this one, we happen to be using the route params. And so now we use URL endpoint or route, and we use a template literal to dump in numbers from inputs, which are in the state, to the URL. And then when we get the data back, the data comes back as response that we extract the text from. And then in number 24, we update the state based off the now accessible text from the response. Pausing and letting anyone chime in. I'm actually probably going to stop it there, only because I think that from there you should be able to see the other flow of adding the buttons. I did this in some other code, number 18, 18A and 18B. There you go. Yes, I am super lazy and not going to go through and increment all the other ones. So I will take, I'm actually not going to share this in Slack, but I will put it in the code repo. And so you guys can access it there, and I will link to that in the homework assignment in Google Classroom. So I did stop short, but 3 minutes under the deadline. So I'm giving myself credit for that. And hopefully that breaks it down step by step. Even reading this code doesn't make sense if you start at the top and work your way all the way to the bottom. And so you've got to take that approach of like, all right, let me pick a starting point and figure out what these inputs are doing, and then figure out what the button is doing, and then figure out, we've got to put it in state and all of that. Kyle, I know your commenting game is on point, so I can only imagine what it's going to be with numbers in it now. Two more minutes to ask any questions, to tell me how much your brain is going to explode if we cover one more thing. Feel free to submit the feedback form. You felt that tonight was too fast. Be honest. Do not hesitate to say that it is too fast. The good news is that I'm going to be repeating this over and over and over again. So you're going to get practice starting up a server from scratch. You're going to get practice starting up a React app from scratch. We're going to use all those concepts again tomorrow when we remake our chat app. Hopefully we're layering in and building in what we already know, and more practice with React, more practice with the server, all of that kind of stuff. So I know this is the first time you're seeing a lot of it. It will not be the last.
Hey Max, what's your typical like desk setup? I know you talked about opening certain things, but like, do you make sure you have Google up? Like, just more insight into like your setup for a day.
Yeah, so I work on two 28-inch monitors. I break those monitors down into quadrants. When I'm teaching, I do have my third laptop monitor open, just so when I'm sharing my screen, I'm not sharing 28 inches that are crammed down onto 13 inches, which is why you always see me looking over here, because that's where my smaller laptop monitor is. Unless I am doing like design work where like someone has sent me a mock-up and I'm building that out in the front end, I will use my laptop monitor for that. Otherwise, I have found 3 monitors is actually too many monitors. And so I use my two 28-inch monitors. Back probably 5 years ago, I made the switch from 3 24-inch monitors to 2 28-inch monitors. Totally personal preference, just takes a little while to get used to it. The jump to 4K is totally worth it if you can afford 4K. I have the lower end 4K monitors, and it is amazing how much my eyes thank me when I am reading code, because the code is so much sharper. It is the difference between reading code on your high-res laptop monitor compared to an HD external monitor. Game changer. didn't know that I needed it until I got it, and then I was like, now I read text on an HD monitor, and I'm just like squinting, and my eyes hurt right away. You know me meandering, not actually answering your question. For me, I break everything into quadrants. So the top left quadrant, I have 2 tabs, my front end and my back end terminal. And those servers are running, and that is all that I ever put in the top left quadrant, because the terminal is telling me when there is an error in the back end server. The terminal is telling me when it has finished restarting. And the front end terminal is React reading my code, telling me if there is an error or if I forgot to import something or something like that. Bottom left quadrant I use for iTunes. I cannot program without music. I listen to music 8 hours a day, or Apple Music, I guess it's called now. It's not called iTunes anymore, but constantly listening to music. And then on top of that, I put a window for my database server, because I'm constantly working in the database, checking to make sure the data has been saved in there, checking to make sure that it's pulling out properly, seeing if something has been deleted, anything like that. So that window goes down there. Top right, I put my browser where I'm actually running my codes. That's my localhost 3000. Bottom right, I don't really put anything. I may put like a Google window down there. And that's just on one monitor. Then on the monitor on the right, I have my front end code take half of it up on the left side, and my back end code take up the other right half of it. And then in the bottom right, kind of behind those windows, I layer Slack, text messages, and I guess that's it. Oh, and my email. So I have all 3 of those stacked on top of each other and can just pull it apart. I have a Logitech MX Master mouse that does not only have left and right click buttons, it has a horizontal scroll wheel on the side. It's got a front and a back button. So when I'm browsing the web, I can hit back and forward. And then there's a little button built into the thumb rest that exposes all my windows and just spreads out all the windows so I can easily switch between them. So yes, I am the most ADHD or ADD or OCD or whatever you would like to call it about Windows. I was not joking about my brain imploding if you swap my 2 windows. Or God forbid, if I need a third code window open for like legacy code or a code example that I am copying over, 3 code windows makes my head explode. You can keep your front end code in your brain, and you can add your back end code and have them running side by side and kind of jumping back and forth between them. But as soon as you add a third thing in there, your brain's like, screw it, I'm done. I just can't do this. And so, yes, there are things that have taken me literally 10 years of professional development to know what the right workflow is, to know what windows are open. And it does change, right? I did, like, when I'm working on front end work and I've got a mock-up that I'm reproducing, I change my windows around just so I can have that open. So really depends. I've got a whole setup for teaching as well, where it's like those windows are different, and I keep you guys here so that when you ask a question, I'm looking at my web camera and you feel like I'm talking to you, right? Because there's nothing worse than me trying to answer a question and you're like, he doesn't care about me. There's no eye contact, right? So it's like those little things matter. So yeah, whenever I'm in a video call, I put that on top of my code windows, because I shouldn't be working on code if I'm in a video call. We've got a pretty strict policy of meetings should be small. Meetings should only have the people in them that need to be. And if you haven't said anything the entire meeting, why in God's name are you in that meeting? And you will find that at companies all the time. You get thrown into meetings where you're like, I got absolutely nothing out of that meeting and couldn't focus because someone was talking the whole time. And so meeting culture is a big thing as well. But fortunately, we were remote before the pandemic. And so we were able to scale the team pretty quickly, even during the pandemic. But meeting culture is an interesting thing of being a developer.
Can I ask another question? It might be kind of personal. If you don't want to answer it, that's fine. I'm just curious, what is your internet setup? Do you pay top dollar for your internet? Like, I know for us, I think other people have said this, unstable internet, you know, just trying to keep up. I'm just curious what the investment is.
Yeah. There are very few questions you can ask me and get a short answer out of. When I was in Syracuse, I had a house in North Syracuse, and FiOS, fiber optic, was available through Verizon. The thing with internet speed is that they tell you all these numbers, but unless you have an idea of how much you use on a daily basis, you can't really have any idea of what the numbers are. There are two numbers that matter: your upload speed and your download speed. Cable is a master at telling you how fast their download speeds are, and it just, wow, look at how fast they are. And then they don't tell you the upload speed. And even if you ask them, they go, oh, you don't need the upload speed. It's the download speed is what matters, right? You consume a lot more content on the internet than you upload. And then the pandemic happened, and everyone was on video calls where they were uploading. And there were couple kids in the house on video calls at the same time as their meetings. And all of a sudden, upload speed started to matter a lot more, because you weren't just downloading a video or streaming a video on the download speeds, you were also getting your upload speeds on the video. And so the reason why cable doesn't want to advertise their upload speeds are, one, they're way slower than their download speeds, just due to the nature of cable and like literally the physics of how electricity works inside of a cable. And two, because FiOS has what they call symmetrical internet speeds. So when you pay for 200 megabits on FiOS for your download speed, you are getting 200 megabits as the upload speed as well. On cable, those numbers do not match. So you can be paying for 400 megabit download speeds and only getting 1, 3, maybe even 5 as your upload speeds. And so that is why if you go look at your Comcast, your Spectrum bill right now, it won't have the upload speed on it. It will tell you you're paying for Blast Pro, Ultimate, Premium, whatever, and you can go on their website and find the download speeds, but nowhere will you find the upload speeds. And the upload speeds are what matters. And so what I recommend is roughly 20 to 25 megabit download speeds for every person working on that internet connection actively. So if you got 3 people working from your house, you need between 60 and 75 megabit download speeds. For your upload speeds, you can get away with 1 if you can have 5 megabit upload per person working at the house at the same time. That's kind of your ideal. 5 megabit upload speeds, you're going to be hard pressed to need something faster than that unless you're uploading a YouTube video or doing something super data intensive. So for day-to-day programming, 5 megabit upload is kind of what you want as your minimum. So that is the huge difference between fiber and cable, is that when you pay for 200 megabit on fiber, you're getting 200 megabit upload as well. And that's why fiber is so much faster. Verizon does something really stupid where they've got great intro rates and you can get FiOS for $40 a month and you're like, wow, this is fantastic. And then after a year, your rates go up to $60 a month. And then a year later, they go up to $80. If you've got 2 people in your house, partner, roommate, husband, whatever it is, you can call in to Verizon. You can cancel your service, and the next day you set it up in your partner's or your roommate's name, and you get the intro pricing again. Drove me crazy. I called in. I told them I was doing that, and they said, yep, no problem. We don't care. We don't lose, or we got our paycheck paid. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. You're sending someone out to the house to reconnect the service. They literally walk in and go, oh, you're all set. It was set from yesterday, and walk out. I said, you're literally losing a ton of money. Like, I get that you want people to call back in and ask for a lower rate so you can upsell them, you can upgrade them to I don't mind doing all of that. The fact that you're making me cancel the service and then reopen the service in someone's name, we did that for 4 years in a row. I can't make it up, but if Fios is available to you, literally cable cannot compete. Like, it is physics, it is science of the cable. Fiber is literally a glass tube, and they shoot lasers through fiber, and that is how fiber internet works. So you are literally comparing a copper wire that we've used since the early 1900s to a flexible glass tube that is shooting lasers in it. And that is the difference between cable and fiber. With that said, fiber is not available in downtown Syracuse, but it is available in almost all of the Syracuse suburbs, depending on where you are and how far out, and it's something to look into. Verizon will try and sell you and go, we don't have fiber available, but we do have DSL. The difference between cable and fiber is the same difference between cable and DSL. DSL is so slow, it can barely support a video call. So DSL, if that is your only option, you are really unlucky. Cable is a decent option. Just make sure you're checking your upload speeds and you're paying for a fast enough upload speed. And if you can get fiber, it is probably worth it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we live in the part of Manlius where they don't have it and they don't plan to give it to us. And then we have friends right up the street that have Fios. So with 3 people hammering away at their computers all day, it's interesting.
So I'm currently at my parents' house, and they are in a beach town. And because the population of the island goes from 100,000 in the summer down to 10,000 in the winter, and 90,000 people are calling up Comcast and saying, turn off my service, I'm not going to be down there until next summer. And so Comcast won't invest in any infrastructure, and neither will Verizon, because 9 months out of the year, most of the service isn't being used. So even though that Fios is available right across the bridge on the mainland, and they've invested in all of that infrastructure, they won't do it on the island because they can't recoup the costs of all of that infrastructure. And so we are stuck in a monopoly where we don't have any options. DSL is so slow, and Comcast is literally the only option. So yes, we pay top dollar for the top rated Comcast speed. We have 1,000 megabit, which is considered gigabit. It is so freaking fast. And what is ridiculous about it is the most data intensive thing you can do on a download stream is stream a 4K video. So 4 times the resolution of HD. That takes a whopping 25 megabits. We have 1,000. Who could possibly need 1,000 megabit? The problem is the only way we can get 40 megabit upload speeds is if we have the 1,000 megabit download speed. So yeah, that is my rant about internet, and what I tell people is 25 megabit download per person and 5 megabit upload per person is ideal. You can get away with 3-ish per person for the upload speeds. 1 is cutting it close. But that's what I tend to recommend for bandwidth. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay. Satellite compares to DSL. It does not compare to cable. Satellite speeds are known for being inconsistent. You can get decent internet speeds for it from satellite. With that said, we have 2 technologies on the future that I actually believe are going to revolutionize internet connections in the US. That is 5G, because 5G has a lot lower infrastructure costs to install than fiber itself. And the other thing coming is Starlink. Starlink is SpaceX. SpaceX is Elon Musk's company. they are launching hundreds of these tiny little satellites that are in lower Earth orbit. So instead of current internet satellites that are in higher orbit, that take a long time just because literally you've got to send the signal all the way up to them and get the signal all the way down. Starlink uses low Earth orbit. So they launch a lot more of these satellites that are cheaper to launch. And because they are lower to the ground, they can get data up and back from them a lot faster. So Starlink will actually compete with cable internet speeds, which is a great option because there are a lot of people who can't get cable internet. It is Elon Musk. I am a Elon Musk fan. I drink the Kool-Aid. I think he's an actual genius. If you have not read the Elon Musk biography, it's worth reading. It reads like fiction. When he was a teenager, he was trying to build a rocket and couldn't find any documentation on what he needed. So he literally learned Russian to get the Saturn rocket manual technical documentation, whatever it was, to read that to figure out what he needed to do for this rocket. So like actual genius. And yes, he is behind SpaceX. He is behind Tesla. He is behind a company called Solar City. He was an original founder of this small company you may have heard of called PayPal. And he was pretty much one of the first engineers to write the code your GPS uses in order to get directions. Oh, and the Boring Company. Thank you, Mel. Forgot about that. And was involved with the Hyperloop as well. Actual literal genius. And yes, has Asperger's. Just unbelievable. Yes, he says crazy things. Yes, he says things to the public that he shouldn't be saying as a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar car company. Literally, Tesla has a larger market cap than every car manufacturer combined. And they produce 1/100th of all the cars in the world. If you want to see investment in technology, compare the value of Tesla to Ford or Toyota or any other company. Karen, I can't name any CEO off the top of my head that does that shit. I mean, you look at Tim Cook or anyone at Apple or Google or Microsoft, and they're all polished and they're all doing these presentations. And then Elon Musk is up on the stage taking questions from the crowd, answering these super technical questions and answering them about battery chemistry and knowing where the mining is coming from. And it's just like, you're asking someone questions like, how do you know the answer to that? You're the CEO of the company. You normally would be concerned about high level stuff, and he's boots on the ground, literally sleeping in the factory, solving problems. They could be plants. That's a good point, Latonia. I don't think they are. Sorry, fanboyed there. Any other questions for tonight? All right, I'm going to go add this code to GitHub, and then I will add that link to the Google Classroom assignment. Thank you, guys. Hopefully I didn't chat your ear off too much.